Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the side event organized by UNESCO, together with the support of a permanent mission of Germany and Kenya, entitled Leveraging Ocean Science and Innovation for Healthy and Resilient Coastal and Marine Ecosystems. It's probably quite early in New York, 7:30, so thank you for our audience joining us who is attending the High-Level Policy Forum, and this event is a contribution to this High-Level Policy Forum. My name is Julian Barbier. I'm the head of Marine Policy and of Regional Coordination at the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, and also coordinator of the Ocean Decade. And I will have a pleasure to moderate this session today. So as I'm sure some of you must know, this high-level policy forum is a very important gathering of UN member states, and it really provides the formal review process for the implementation of SDG 14 this year in particular, but also it is addressing other SDGs like SDG 15 on terrestrial biodiversity, or number 4 on quality education, as well as gender equity, number 5, and partnerships, number 17. And I think, as we will hear across during our side event today, the ocean really cuts across all these dimensions, and we will, I'm sure, go into more in depth. The purpose of our event today is really to highlight why ocean science is so important to the achievement of SDGs and SDG 14 in particular, but also to showcase what investments and partnerships in research are being done around the world, generating ocean observations, but also looking at different ways of engaging local communities to support sustainable development and to conserve and restore ocean ecosystems. So a couple of house rules maybe before we go into the structure of our meeting. I just want to highlight that we will have if you could kindly turn off your microphones and cameras during the presentations. If you wish to make questions, and I certainly hope we will have a little bit of time for Q&As with our panelists, you will then please raise your hand, which is basically one of the buttons at the bottom of your screen in the Zoom application. I'm sure by now you are all aware of how to do that. If you want to make any comments, please use the chat. And also, if you have any technical issues, please also use the chat. In terms of the structure of our 1 hour and a half event today, we will have a first segment. No, first of all, we will have the opening, and we will hear from our 2 sponsoring member states, Kenya and Germany. And then we will also have a pleasure to have our Assistant Director General of UNESCO, Vladimir Ryabine, with us for also some opening word. And then we will go straight into our 2 rounds, 2 panels. First one is really focusing on progress and challenges and opportunities in implementing SDG 14, with a focus on two areas where UNESCO and its IOC are particularly engaged. And then the segment 2 will focus on innovation in ocean observation technologies and information delivery, but also talking about socio-ecological innovation in terms of empowering local communities to build resilience and protect biodiversity. So without further ado, I would like to go straight to the opening segment, and we will have a welcoming word from Mrs. Bärbel Koffler, German Parliamentary State Secretary from the Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, and we have, I believe, a video message from the State Secretary. If we could play this, thanks.
Dr. Ryabine, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, oceans are the source of all life. They cover 70% of the Earth's surface. are home to a wealth of biodiversity, provide food and income for millions of people across the world, and regulate our climate by absorbing heat. So we can only conserve biodiversity, mitigate climate change, reduce poverty, and achieve sustainable development if we also protect the oceans. Yet oceans are in increasing distress as a result of advancing climate change, increased population, acidification, and overfishing. We must act now before it's too late. We need to make sure that today and in future generations, all people are able to enjoy the benefits of healthy marine and coastal ecosystems. That means the international community stepping up its efforts and halting the loss of ocean biodiversity. Yet with a financing gap of $150 billion a year, SDG 14 is currently one of the most seriously underfinanced goals of the 2030 Agenda. Ocean research is still suffering from a lack of funding, staff, and institutional support systems. As a result, the international community lacks the fundamental knowledge and information it needs to effectively protect the oceans. We urgently need more research to tell us how we can most effectively restore, strengthen, and protect maritime ecosystems. The German government therefore welcomes the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, which aims to increase the focus on the important topic and generate new momentum. The German Development Ministry launched the initiative Mehr Wissen, African-German Partners for Ocean Knowledge, back in 2018, with the aim of uniting policymakers and scientists in the search for workable solutions to maritime protection. The initiative is supporting German-African research partnerships in 12 projects in 7 African countries. The recent third call for proposals issued together with UNESCO IOC is likely to result in a further 4 projects which will focus on nature-based solutions. I'm pleased that today's event will also be looking at that approach in more detail. The aim of the Mehr Wissen initiative is to better link science and policymakers. Its goal is to produce research findings that will help policymakers reach decisions. To that end, it has developed an innovative approach called co-design. It ensures that all stakeholders are involved in research projects right from the outset and have a say in everything from the design to the decision-making process. This means that new findings are not just generated, but can actually be applied in holistic, science-based marine conservation. We at the German Development Ministry are delighted that the Mehr Wissen initiative can make such an important contribution to the United Nations Oceans Decade as an official endorsed action. I would like to thank UNESCO IOC for our close and productive collaboration on this. And I look forward to working with you on developing the Mehr Wissen approach as part of the UN Ocean Decade. Please do join us in supporting this initiative. Because looking to the future, we need to unite civil society, governments, and other stakeholders in defining the questions science should address. This is a way to ensure the solutions developed are actually workable in practice. That is the only way we will have a transformation impact and succeed in protecting both humans and oceans over the long term. Thank you.
Thank you very much, State Secretary Koffler. And of course, we are very grateful for the support of Germany in the work of the Ocean Decade. As it's been mentioned, Germany also supported the launch of a decade with the first international conference, which was a very intensive but very productive process through the Decade Laboratories that generated a lot of enthusiasm and great ideas for the decade. My next speaker is representing a country which is also very much involved in the work to introduce James Injuru, Chief Officer from the Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute. Over to you, Professor Injuru.
Thank you, Julian. The camera says that You have stopped. You cannot view me. Eh? So I will proceed even without the camera. Is that okay? It says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
Yes. Let me.
Okay. As you move on, let me take this opportunity also to thank you and the organizers. May I start by saying that science tells us most of the ocean remained quite unexplored. And as the saying goes, that only probably 5% of the ocean has been explored and charted by human beings. Additionally, as the saying goes, you cannot manage what you do not know. And that is why, in my opinion, the UN Assembly was spot on to task IOC-UNESCO to coordinate the decade of ocean science, what we now call the decade, the 10 years which are now dedicated at ocean science and literacy and management. Ladies and gentlemen, the decade resonates very well with the current scenario in our ocean. Of course, inadequate data or lack of data. And that's why the theme of our decade is a science we need for the oceans, for the ocean we want. And it could not have come at a better time. The aim of the decade is to leverage on ocean science, innovation, that will be very key in managing and the exploitation of our marine resources. As we move on into the decade, we cannot fail to recognize the SDGs, the interlinked blueprint to achieve a better and a more sustainable future for all, especially in the ocean issues. For example, there is a very clear nexus among SDG 13, that is climate action, SDG 14, life below water, and of course, SDG 15, life on Earth. The decade calls for action towards higher the nation. However, despite several challenges affecting the ocean, like pollution, acidification, inadequate data, COVID, and all the others, I would want to say that we are very happy as Kenya, under the coordination of the IOC and the coordination of Vladimir. It is my opinion, it's in your opinion, that the one is progressing very well and in the right direction on the issues of matters of the ocean. The just concluded UN Ocean Conference in Portugal, in Lisbon, is a case in point. And you cannot forget, of course, other conferences like the first Sustainable Blue Economy, which was held in Kenya in 2018, UNEA 2022, Stockholm Plus 2022, among others, where awareness and the commitments were taken a notch higher in terms of commitment in issues of the ocean. There are other several events which have been lined up in issues touching the ocean. Some of them will include ocean and environment meetings which are coming up, conference of parties which are coming up, and many more. We are now seeing a buy-in in key stakeholders concerned with the ocean management and exploitation. Partnership is being cemented towards ocean issues. One cannot fail to mention the political goodwill currently being exhibited. And again, I'll point the second UN conference, which has just ended in Portugal, which was championed by two presidents, President of Kenya and that of Portugal. And again, we cannot fail also to recognize that the president of France, who also came up there, and Costa Rica, have agreed again to co-host the next Ocean Decade in 2025. We also have the Ocean Alliance and the high-level panel, which are populated by heads of states. This is a good thing as we move on, and because we know that SDG 14 is one of the least funded SDGs and probably the least understood as we move on. However, this seems to be changing with this political goodwill. As I conclude, I come from a marine science institution known as Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute, and we too have embraced the Ocean Decade mission of transformative ocean science solutions for sustainable development, connecting people and our ocean. Ladies and gentlemen, we acknowledge the need to co-create ocean science with partners for multiple scales. We need to match the social science, discipline, and scientific studies, among others. We need to support the application of ocean science for societal benefit as we integrate the science to policy dialogues in the journey. Finally, as ocean stakeholders, we should seize this golden opportunity in furtherance of sustainable and healthy ocean. Finally, let me take this opportunity to thank the organizers of the side event that is continuing to build momentum on the ocean science in the decade. We should not tire in this endeavor, and the more the better. We should target to leave a better ocean for our next generation. I thank you all.
Thank you very much, Professor Njuru, and thank you for the great leadership that Kenya has demonstrated. And as you mentioned, it was also a real pleasure to hear President Kenyatta at the Ocean Decade Alliance event last Monday in Lisbon to commit to the work of a decade, but also calling his peers to also invest more in ocean science. So thank you for that. With this, our last speaker for the opening segment is Dr. Vladimir Ryabine, Assistant Director General of UNESCO and Executive Secretary of the IOC. Over to you, Vladimir.
Thank you very much, Julian. And let me greet all the participants. I see 92 participants in the call, apparently from all parts of the world. And also particularly, I would like to thank our colleagues, representatives of the governments of Germany and Kenya for opening this event. Ms. Bärbel Kofler, German Parliamentary State Secretary of the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, and my dear friend, Professor James Giro, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute that does very important work in all aspects of ocean sciences. You know, many people referred to the conference that took place last week. And at the start of the conference, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres recalled that the Sustainable Development Goal 14 is actually the least funded among all SDGs. But it is definitely central for achieving all the goals of the sustainability agenda. Indeed, ocean is the center point of many issues, and because of that, it suffers from multidimensional threats caused by combined pressures of climate change, overfishing, biodiversity loss, pollution, and many other activities that result from us humans. And indeed, the solution to this is based on science, and that is also confirmed very, very visibly by the conference in Lisbon last week that identified science and innovation as key enablers for implementation of Sustainable Development Goal 14, but also many, many Sustainable Development Goals. Almost all of them have an ocean dimension, including, of course, the SDG 13 on climate, SDG 2 on food and resilient cities, and continue this list, of course. You know, indeed, ocean science is central. Ocean is very difficult to understand and to observe, and ocean science is indeed needed to understand the changes in the ocean, also related changes in climate and also in life on the planet. And we will very soon hear from participants, and Jacqueline Uku is going to present to you some results that shows that ocean science is critically underfunded, and we do need investments, significant investments. I actually insist on the word investments rather than expenditures, because there will be very significant return. So we need investments in ocean mapping, development of global ocean observing system, increasing prediction capacity, actually scope of predictions on ocean stressors, continued transfer of knowledge, capacity, technology, and also, of course, this has to be done between developed countries, small island developing states, and least developed countries. We know how to do it, and there are mechanisms. So indeed, UNESCO and its Environmental Oceanographic Commission play significant role, a key role in reporting on SDG 14. And in the first part of that event, you will hear more about our role as custodian agency for 2 SDG 14 targets. And then also we provide technical support, scientific support to other United Nations agencies to work also and report to United Nations on marine pollution and ecosystem-based management. Indeed, IOC of UNESCO is the ocean science hub, and because of that, we accumulate knowledge on the state of the ocean. And at the conference last week, we presented to the conference, to the world, a new report, State of the Ocean report, It was launched in Lisbon and will be published on a regular basis to update, to keep the world abreast of the situation in the ocean, not only in terms of its physical or chemical, biological state, but also in terms of management in the ocean. That is a big development. And that report will be complementing activities of other United Nations organizations without any duplication. So I think from all discussions, it's clear that we have to create a revolution in ocean knowledge. And for that, we need a platform. So international community agreed that we need also significant time to make this initiative a large scale. And because of that, United Nations proclaimed in 2017 the Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development and entrusted IOC of UNESCO to coordinate, prepare the plan, coordinate the implementation of that decade. I have to say, I need to thank everyone for helping to craft the plan of the decade and now to reach unprecedented level of activities, which turning the decade into the largest undertaking in ocean sciences ever. And indeed, the declaration in Lisbon that was adopted last Friday calls specifically on nation stakeholders to support the decade and also the work of OSCE to achieve the ambitions of the decade. So indeed, once again, the work on science is very essential and we need to develop the knowledge. But you know, this knowledge has to be applied. We need philosophy and strategy for this. And the philosophy and strategy basically I think can converge to managing the ocean sustainably. We have elements of that work. And UNESCO, not only IOC, but UNESCO is the big organization, provides framework for many activities focused on management of the ocean. For example, World Heritage Marine Sites, there are 47 of them. There is a network of 738 biosphere reserves. Many of them are coastal or marine. And we are really increasing dramatically the scale of maritime spatial planning. So the ocean is becoming more and more managed. But also we have to keep the world safe, and managing the ocean also involves keeping the world safe from tsunamis. So this is the ambition of the Tsunami Ready program of OSCE, to mobilize and all available knowledge, and not only to improve modeling of tsunami and warning system, but also enable societies to cope with natural disasters of this kind and really react when tsunami happens. And of course, this is only possible when society understands the role of the ocean and what needs to be done with it. So raising awareness is very, very important. And we need to involve many types of societal actors in this process. This, of course, requires also education. I'm very glad to see that our member states started to promote education in schools about the ocean. And the vehicle for this is our work on ocean literacy that is taking, I think, unprecedented level. And because of that, we can cope that will be a new future workforce, and people will be developing their more human relations with the ocean. So working across the linkages between many SDGs is important. And because of that, we organized this side event on the margins of the high-level policy forum. And we will try to explore how investment and partnership in research, observations, fit-for-purpose data products, services can empower your member states' decision-making in relation to the ocean. This will definitely also support industry, local communities, support the better life of the whole world. So with that very noble intention, contributing to your needs, I would like to return the floor to our moderator, Julian Barbier. Thank you very much for participating in this important side event.
Thank you very much, Vladimir, for those good words and for defining and explaining the vision of our work at the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission and UNESCO. So with this, we can now go straight into our first panel, and I have three great experts with us to talk about how nations are progressing with some dimensions of SDG 14. We're going to focus particularly on ocean acidification and marine scientific research, looking at some of the challenges, the opportunities, but also the capacity development. So I'd like now to ask our three panelists to turn on their camera. So we have with us Dr. Jacqueline Oku, who's the co-chair of the editorial board of the Global Ocean Science Report. And Jacqueline is with the Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute. We also have Jan Newton, who's the co-chair of a global ocean acidification observing network, GOAON, and he's a senior principal oceanographer at the University of Washington in the US. And then finally, we also have a pleasure to have Evgenia Kostianaya, who is a global leader for the UN Ocean Decade Program, focusing on the engagement of early career ocean professionals. So with this short introduction, I think we're going to go straight into our topic, and I will first of all invite Professor Uku to give us an overview on where we are with this particularly important target, marine scientific research, which is part of SDG 14, and where we are with the status of ocean science capacities around the world. Over to you, Jacqueline.
Thank you very much, Julian. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen. My job today is to talk a bit about the Ocean Science Report 2020, and specifically the SDG indicator 14.A1. So we can have the next slide. Indicator 14.A1 specifically looks at increasing scientific knowledge through the development of research capacity and transfer of marine technology. And it falls within the SDG 14, which looks at life underwater. And more specifically, what we measure for this specific target is shown on this slide in 14.A.1, which is the proportion of total research budget allocated to research in the field of marine technology. We can go to the next slide. On this slide, I'll just explain what we did to undertake measurements of ocean science and contributions of member states towards ocean science. And we set out to measure and to get statistics and data to just evaluate where we are in terms of the targets that we had set under SDG 14. And we sent out questionnaires, and I'll go a bit more into the process. But what I'd like to point out is that out of the maybe around 150 member states, we had 45 member states that responded to this survey, the questionnaire. And also we gathered information through bibliometric, tetrametric, and gender-specific analysis. Our board was a board of 12 members, 5 female, 7 male, from 12 of these member state countries. We had expert authors, expert reviewers, and the report as it stands today is used as a baseline of our contribution to ocean science. And so we'd like to acknowledge all that contributed to this process and this report. Next slide. It is a resource for policymakers, and it can be found at that link in the IOC-UNESCO website. And it has an executive summary that highlights some of the key findings. Today, I'll just scope on some of the findings, and that is a very small amount, a proportion of the data that we collected. It's more than a document, it's actually our roadmap towards understanding how we are really contributing and how we value the ocean that we have been talking about, I think, in many, many dialogues and on many platforms. Next slide. Our questionnaire facilitated inputs. We had questionnaires that the questionnaire captured governance and organizational information, how countries spend on science, national research capacity and infrastructure, oceanographic data and information, and capacity development, as well as SDGs and our contribution, particularly to SDG 14, and how it links with specific SDGs. And the report is available in 3 languages, English, French, and Spanish. Next slide. In addition, we also tried to push to get views and inputs from various focal points in member states. We had interactions with IOC chairs and vice chairs, and we also gave presentations at various IOC subcommissions just to be able to put information forward. But we had challenges. The journey was not without its problems. Many countries found it very hard to input onto an online questionnaire platform. We found that focal points that were required to give us information had incorrect information on email accesses. We had delayed communication. Some found the questionnaire quite difficult, but it's an exercise that we are reviewing and will continue to pursue, even as we update the report with help offered through the Secretariat. Next slide. Now, we had some top findings, and I'll elaborate some of them. And I'd like to just emphasize that in this era of COVID, we've seen what statistics and data can do in advancing decision-making. And in the same way, the Global Ocean Science Report is data sets that can help us advance decision-making around marine and coastal resources, what to use, what to protect in our MSP processes. And so these top findings are very critical in that decision-making process. And we found that ocean science has direct implications for sustainable development policies and can be applied to management strategies and action plans in several sectors, not just the ocean sector. We found that funding for ocean science in member states is largely inadequate. We found that women in ocean science continue to be underrepresented, particularly in technical categories. We also learned that there is a recognition of young scientists and the level of support offered to them to grow their careers is widely differential between countries. We also found that publications worldwide continue to increase, especially in Eastern and Southern Asia. In Africa, our publication level has not met the global threshold. We found that in terms of ocean data, which is critically important for the safeguarding of our oceans, countries are inadequately equipped to manage the data, to even obtain the data. And there are also critical issues around open data and data sharing. And so SDG 14A, which is mandated to IOC-UNESCO, and put the Global Ocean Science Report forward as a process that can systematically assist us analyze and understand the status of our contribution to ocean science, which is critically important for us to move forward. Next slide. So here we look at human capacity, and the report has very beautiful and concrete data sets that can be used for decision making. And we found, as I said earlier, that gender equality is far from being achieved. Female researchers account for 39% of global scientists. But what we found that was very interesting is that for ocean science, this was 10% higher than the global share of female researchers in natural sciences. We also found that women are participating in conferences. They're increasingly talking to the world. And in any given conference, we'll find at least 29% to 53% of participants being female within ocean science categories and also within the regions. Next slide. We found that ocean science is important because it generates both knowledge and applications. The outputs of science are increasing both across the world. Competitive ocean science is driven by international partnerships, so there is a thrust to create fruitful partnerships, significant and strategic partnerships to be able to drive ocean science. And we also found that international collaboration has driven a higher quality of work, especially in countries that do not have traditions of ocean science or are growing that capacity. We found that collaboration is vital in just growing capacities within nations, especially in Africa and the island states. Next slide. In terms of investments, how much is our governments contributing to ocean science in terms of their budgets? And on average, only 1.7% of national research budgets are allocated to ocean science. And the percentage could go as low as 0.03%, which is really small compared to the 1.5 trillion US dollars that the ocean contributes to the global economy. And so that also shone a spotlight on how much more we need to do to push nations, push governments to contribute to ocean science from their own budgets. Next slide. We found that in terms of strategy, many countries do not have a specific strategy to measure the progress and the achievement of SDG 14. Many countries talk about blue economy, but lack a blue economy strategy, which is part of this dialogue. And that then means that we are not sure which direction nations should take in the absence of strategic alignment and visions that target the ocean. We found that 37 countries that responded to this question. Some have a roadmap, but only 21% reported they have a strategic document and a strategic approach. And also not only that strategic approach, but a department or a ministry that is focused solely on the achievement of ocean-related goals, SDG 14, and the blue economy. Next slide. We have a roadmap. Those are just a few results. The report, as we indicated earlier, is full of weighted results that are very critical in helping us understand where the gaps are within our nations. And we are beginning to prepare for the next stage of this report. Remember, I said it is a baseline, and our preparation will begin next year. And we would like to continue to track how much ocean work, how much ocean contribution governments are putting in to the dialogue. We will also have a short questionnaire focusing on human and technical resources, science investment, and this will be sent to member states in the third quarter of 2022. Next slide. So this brings me to the end of my presentation. I would love to share many of these results, and we've been sharing them over the past year since the report was launched in 2020, and having dialogue on critical aspects that we need to look into as member states of IOC-UNESCO, and also as global partners in this journey. So thank you, Julian, for the opportunity. I'd like to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline, for giving us an overview of this very important report and how it really provides a snapshot of the how capacities are distributed around the world, but also how science is also being used to support sustainable development very concretely. And I think the message is clear: is that the capacity of countries to implement sustainable strategies is also very much interlinked to their own scientific capacity at the national level. So some very important messages as well for the future. Thank you very much. We'll move now to Jan Newton, who is going to talk to us about the SDG Target 14.3, which is focusing on the impacts of ocean acidification. Jan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Julian. It's my extreme pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be yet another spokesperson for the ocean Thank you to all those attending. And so what I'm going to focus on after that wonderful introduction by Jacqueline is the target that is focused 14.3 within the goal of 14 to minimize and address the impacts of ocean acidification, including through enhanced scientific cooperation at all levels. The indicator for this has been chosen to be the average marine acidity, or pH, measured at agreed suite of representative sampling stations. So we have a global call to collect ocean acidification data that can support this goal. And what I'd like to do is talk to you about the progress on that, but also to frame it that we need to address the local scales on a global scale in a global manner. So to start that, next slide, please. I'm going to share with you a story from some research that I'm actively involved with out of the University of Washington, funded through the United States NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is a regional vulnerability assessment to ocean acidification. It's an integrated social ecological look at that. So working with social and natural scientists. And it takes place on the outer coast of the state of Washington. Maybe many of you have not been there, but it has been home to 4 coastal treaty tribes since time immemorial. And I think it paints a really important story of how these local stories are so important. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about that local story. Okay, so with the next slide, here is a schematic of the Olympic Coast social ecological system. And I'm a biological oceanographer. As I think of an ecosystem, prior to this work, there weren't humans in it. And that's something that was really so important to me and something that I want to pass along, that we really need to be thinking about why we are doing these SDGs, even when we get down into the scientific details. And so here you see the species, in yellow, the circles that came from the interviews with the tribes. And in terms of where were those focal species that were so critical for the sustainment of the culture. And that little wheel that you can't see, but the different colors there represent social science steps, natural science steps, and working together to make this vulnerability assessment. And I can tell you what has come from this is some really important results. So with the next slide, one of the things that emerges is the importance of one clam, a razor clam, to the tribes. Obviously, that has been since time immemorial, but thinking now in terms of how do we make a scientific assessment, looking at when they settle in April and May, and thinking about what are the conditions, things like aragonite saturation state that go even beyond pH, but help us to understand how this whole system is supporting the culture and the people who live in it. So the next slide. So with that little example, I want to bring us back now to this global focus. And we know ocean acidification is happening on a global scale from the IPCC reports for years. All the major basins are encountering this, but how it plays out on local shorelines with local cultures, with local species is very different. And also with how other things like nutrients or river mouths may be affecting the acidity of the water. It's really important that we think about the system. So with the next slide, I want to say that in order to understand the global status, we need to understand the myriad of these local pictures, but also to get the local pictures correctly, it has to be embedded in that global context. So we need both of these scales and we need to be able to integrate back and forth. That demands our coordination, our network skill, and our open analysis. And I want to give a big shout out to the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network, or GOON, and its UN endorsed program OARS that will work to coordinate these activities. And a huge shout out to UNESCO, IOC, IAEA, Ocean Acidification Coordination Center, and NOAA, who have been supporting GOAN and OARS to try to achieve these results with the scientific community. So the next slide, how are we doing? So coming back to this initial slide and now focusing on that indicator 14.3.1, where are we with that? It's a bit of a big lift, yes. And so what we needed to do is have a portal that will allow people to put data in. The International Oceanographic Data and Information Exchange, IODE, has that portal. There you see all the details of what you can do. So there's great progress on this data portal that has allowed the input of data. Next slide. And here's the good news. We are seeing growth in the people participating, in the numbers of countries participating from 2019 to 2021, increasing from 8 to 37 countries. So 37 countries is good, but we know there's a lot more countries in the world. So we need to keep pushing harder. And with the last slide, I want to reinforce some of these tasks that we have to go forward. We need to reach more people, more nations, and to make it easier for the on-ramping of getting those data on that local scale. And so here's an example of a visualization tool that GOAN is seeking to release soon that will help elevate, where the data are coming from, and to be thinking and working with the community on how we really get the relevant data, how the scientists have the ability to put input on what its significance is. But as I hope you've seen from that short little local talk, how important it is that we get this right. So many cultures and people are depending on this. So we need to work hard to get this done. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jan. Great. So the message I get here, first of all, we need to, as you said, also focus on the local scale, because we are talking about a global process, but really local observations are so important and needs to be really integrated into that global picture. Very nice to see some growth in measurements of countries. We have 37 countries now reporting on these indicators. We have in the IOC 150 member states, coastal member states, primarily. So I think there's progress, but there's still a large gap to be filled. And again, this integration of data through different tools and also integration of different sources of data is very important. So thank you for that. I would like now to go to our last speaker for this first panel, and this is Evgenia Kostianaya, who is going to talk to us about the importance of engaging early career ocean professionals in all this work that we are describing in research, but not only research. Over to you, Evgenia.
Thank you so much, Julian. And I would like to thank all the participants that are here today. And I'm very happy to introduce the ECO program and the work that we are doing within the program for capacity development for early career ocean professionals. So we can start with the presentation. Thank you. So in short, I will just start with a brief overview of what our aims are. So our aim is to elevate the diverse perspectives of the new generations of early career ocean professionals and to make sure that the knowledge and skills are transferred from experienced professionals to younger generations, to early career ocean professionals. And we are doing so by providing ECOPs with meaningful networking opportunities and capacity development opportunities, so that ECOPs could engage with each other, both regionally, but also globally, and not only among themselves, but also with various stakeholders, from local to global institutions within the framework of the UN Ocean Decade, but also beyond that. Next slide, please. So we ran a global survey about 2.5 years ago. And from that survey, we found out that capacity development was certainly one of the top priorities for ECOPs in any part of the world. So that was really one of the most pressing challenges for ECOPs. So this is why with our continuous work, we are focusing on providing capacity development opportunities for recreation professionals.
You were muted for a minute. Yeah, I think we can hear you now.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, so with the help of the IOC-UNESCO and the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, we managed to launch 2 financial calls to support ECOPs in their capacity development. So the first call was to cover participation fees for conferences or training opportunities. That was kind of individual support. And the second call was to provide support for legal entities, so legal organizations who would provide trainings. These were online trainings. The focus was on the Caribbean Seas and Africa, and the participation in those trainings was free for ECOPs. So here on this slide, you can see the titles of 4 trainings that happened this spring. So 2 of them were in Africa and 2 of them were in the Caribbean Seas. Interesting was that these trainings were focused on ocean governance and blue economy. So they were not purely like scientifically, let's say, on oceanography specifically. So they were very successful, and we are planning to repeat them later this year and in the future as well. Can we move to the next slide, please? So our regional work definitely helps us to identify capacity development needs in the regions, because capacity development needs with ECOPs vary significantly among regions, but also within a single region, so among countries. We started this work especially for Asia, and we already see that capacity development needs are different there. So for some countries, this is definitely the funding problem. For some other countries, this is a language barrier, which is a tremendous challenge. And for some others, still, it is more about lack of career development options. So currently, we have regional coordinators working in Africa, Asia, and Canada, and we are planning to expand that work also for the Pacific region, the Caribbean region, US, and Central and South America, where we will continue to look into those details and these cultural and contextual differences. So we are also identifying existing training opportunities, because we do not want to reinvent the wheel. We just want to make a database where such training opportunities already exist, and see what is missing and how we can address that with the help of the whole infrastructure of the Ocean Decade. So as I have already mentioned, we will continue with the online trainings that we started this year, based also on the feedback from the surveys that we run also in spring this year in Africa, Asia, and Canada. Then we will start with a series of free online workshops, webinars. So that would be some really short, a couple of hours maybe, webinars that would mostly target not some scientific topics, but rather interdisciplinary topics, because this is something that we continuously hear from ECOPs, that we need to more focus on interdisciplinarity. So things like science communications, so how do you communicate your science to a wider audience? Things like how to start an NGO or a startup. In the environmental field, how do you find funding for your project? How do you switch careers? What should you do first when you want to move to the marine-related career at a later stage in your life? And we do think that this would be very important and interesting for ECOPs. Then we are working on a database for funding resources, which will be freely available on our website at ecopdecades.org. And again, we consistently hear that ECOPs do need more paid internships. They lack funding for going to conferences, fulfilling their projects, etc. So we want to combine all this information. There are various funders all over the world. It's just a matter of compiling this information and making it easily available for ECOPs. We have also created a database for ECOPs for all over the world, and we are also mapping stakeholders per region. So this will help to easily distribute information for ECOPs about the developments of our program, but as well of the UN Ocean Decade, and it will help connect ECOPs with various stakeholders, not necessarily academic institutions, because we want to really think outside of the box and involve many other sectors related to the ocean. And on the next slide, just a compilation of our social media accounts and ways to stay in touch with us, as well as our website. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Evgenia. Here we go. You've learned today a new acronym, ECOP, an important one. And of course, if you are an ECOP, please do get in touch with Evgenia. I think it's a great group. And I was very happy to see many of the early career professionals with us in Lisbon last week, taking part in several events. And again, this is the beauty of this is that this is a self-driven group, and they are defining their own needs, and we are trying to facilitate access to specific resources and collaborations. So with this, we are not doing great on time. So I was gonna open the floor for questions, but just for equity and for our next group of speakers to have a sufficient time, we will move on to the segment number 2, which is focusing on innovations in observations, in data and information generation, and in community-based management. And then if we have a little bit of time and we can maybe go a little bit over the hour, we can take a few questions. So it's then my pleasure to invite our next 3 speakers, and those are Francisco Chavez, who is a senior scientist at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute in Mbari. Similarly to Jan, he's waking up in the middle of the night to join us. So thank you for that. We have also with us Anya Wade, who is the co-chair of a global ocean observing system, and she is the chief executive officer of the Ocean Frontier Institute at Dalhousie University in Halifax. And then finally, joining us from Portugal, we have the pleasure of having Dr. Antonio Domingos Amber, who is an environmental expert, also contributing to the UNESCO's work on man and the Biosphere program. So let me then start straight into the next presentation, and let me ask Francisco to explain to us, first of all, what is eDNA observation, and why is it such a novel approach to really understand the ocean's biodiversity? Over to you, Francisco.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, Julian. So we all know that the ocean is threatened in a number of ways. The global climate warming, of course, always has taken most of the attention, but the ocean, of course, is threatened in a number of different ways. Next slide, please. So I think one of our early speakers mentioned the importance of accurate and timely information on marine life, which really sustains the long-term health and of our world, and we need to know it to manage it well. And we've made significant investments in physical and biogeochemical ocean observing systems, but today there's really no global systematic effort to observe life in the sea. And I would argue that's because of our lack of scalable methods. So our goal is to greatly increase our ability to observe and quantify how life in the sea is changing. Next slide, please. Our traditional way of monitoring biology or biodiversity in the ocean is to go to sea on a ship, collect samples using nets typically, process those samples visually, and synthesize that information over years or sometimes even decades. Next slide, please. We argue that there's a new set of requirements today. We really need near real-time information, much like we get from moorings of the Togatau array. We need to have that information globally distributed, like we do from Argo floats with physics, and we need that to be multidisciplinary. We need to have this so we know how life in the sea is changing and why it's needed. And that requires a new model. And perhaps we have an emerging technology, environmental DNA, that could help us with this. Next slide, please. eDNA is kind of like forensic science. There's a crime, the crime scene investigator comes in, picks up residues left behind by the suspects, analyze their DNA content, and matches it against the bank of suspects in the Interpol or the FBI to identify the crime perpetrator. In our case, life in the sea are our suspects. We can collect water that contains living cells or residues of larger animals, analyze that eDNA, and figure out who is left behind. We can target individual organisms or communities. I'll give you some examples of that now. Next, please. I apologize for a little bit of science here. These are vertical profiles of different organisms analyzed by eDNA compared to the vertical distribution of oxygen in the ocean. And for an oceanographer like myself, this is an incredible new way of looking at things that we didn't have before. We can compare those profiles for small plants like diatoms, small life like copepods, anchovies, hake, and myctophids. Next slide, please. We can also use this information to see changes over time. This is a data set collected right off of my office in Moss Landing, California, showing how organisms from fish to invertebrates like copepods to phytoplankton like diatoms and dinoflagellates have changed over decades, showing how they respond to big changes in climate compared to, for example, the North Pacific Gyre Oscillation. Next slide, please. So we at MBARI, we've been developing long-range AUVs, and on those long-range AUVs, we've put other developments like the environmental sample processor, which is capable of collecting samples autonomously at sea. And we think that with this new technology, eDNA, we have an incredible opportunity to add these types of capabilities to these long-range AUVs and perhaps even Argo floats, so we can get a picture of how life in the sea is changing over time and space. Next slide, please. And we believe that in the near future, and maybe that future is a decade away or something like that, that we will be able to use these devices to collect water, process it chemically at sea, use miniature sequencers, analyze that information, process it, and be able to send information about what's living in the ocean back in real time to us, and be able to begin compiling how that life in the sea is changing over time and space. Next slide, please. So in summary, I want to argue that eDNA is a powerful new tool for observing life in the sea. It can support a wide variety of applications, from scientific discovery to applied management. There are, of course, tremendous challenges remaining but also tremendous opportunities ahead, including perhaps routine global observations of marine diversity, biodiversity, or life. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you very much, Francisco. This is very interesting stuff. I'm not going to try to summarize, but I have a question that I've been struggling with, and maybe you can try to give me a hint there. Knowing that we have so many species we don't know about in the ocean, and I've heard figures of about 700,000 species that are yet to be discovered by science. Can the eDNA provide a tool for identifying those species, or species needs to be already referenced?
It's kind of the same problem we have with our FBI or Interpol, right? Many of our suspects are not in those data banks. The same is true, of course, for life in the sea. And we have parallel efforts where we want to be able to get those sequences in the data banks so that the eDNA can identify them. Today, we can only identify maybe 50% of the species we can identify with eDNA all the way down to species level. So we have other, that's one of our challenges, is to build those libraries and complete them.
Great, thank you for that. So we're going to stay on the topic of ocean observation, and of course observations are very important to generate the data that we need for reporting on the SDG implementation, for example. So let's now go to Anya Waite to tell us a little bit about the international efforts that are ongoing in terms of ocean observing and how those actually contribute to the SDG.
Great, and thank you very much, Julien. Thank you.
We can't hear you, Anya. I don't know if you're mute.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now, Julien?
We can, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Julien, and thank you to IOC-UNESCO, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Julien today asked me to speak to you a little bit about global observation of carbon and of the critical importance of the ocean in the climate system. Next slide, please. So something that many are not aware of is that the ocean actually controls our climate. It holds 100 times the heat of the atmosphere, next, and 50 times the carbon that's held in the atmosphere. So in a sense, the ocean is our climate. Next slide. So how do we link the ocean to creating and achieving effective climate targets? The IPCC has highlighted for us that we only really have 8 years at current emissions before we cross a threshold and rise above 1.5 degrees of warming, with serious consequences globally. And very often, we do our work on land, we do our policy work on land, and land-based emissions targets fail to recognize that most of the work in the carbon cycle is being done by the ocean. So 40% of our fossil fuel emissions have actually already been absorbed by the ocean, and that absorption may not continue. So on the left there, you see 2 bars on the left-hand side, the source of fossil fuels, 340 petagrams of carbon from land use changes and also from fossil fuel emissions, and then ocean and atmosphere absorption of that carbon. Most of it's gone into the atmosphere, but the rest of it has gone into the ocean. So if the ocean changes or starts to re-emit the carbon that it has absorbed, that means that our land-based actions could be swamped by the release, for example, of carbon. So if we don't understand the trajectory of ocean carbon, we can't actually be confident in our climate targets, and it really undermines our effort to tell industry, for example, to stop emitting carbon. If we can't have enough confidence in the ocean carbon cycle to understand it, for example, less than 5%. Right now it's between 25 and 30% uncertainty, and climate modelers can't even generate what we call a nowcast, which is telling us exactly what's happening now based on data, because there simply are not enough ocean data. And there are signs that extreme events in the ocean are increasing in frequency. We don't know how quickly that frequency will change. Next slide, please. So when we went to COP26 last year, the Global Ocean Observing System, which I co-chair with my colleague Tosta Tanua, sent the message to our global policymakers: the ocean is missing in your conversation right now. And it's critically important that we put the ocean front and center in our climate discussion. Next slide, please. We show the ocean without its, we show the world without its blue ocean. And this is how we're actually tackling climate change right now. Next slide. We need to refill the oceans with the water in order to get a sense of where we really are with our climate trajectory. Next slide, please. How do we do that? Well, the Global Ocean Observing System is a network of networks that brings together observers from around the world to coordinate a long-term and sustained ocean observing system. This is a permanent organization, and we deliver a report every year to the COP through Earth Information Day. And it's a very important organization because we actually reflect globally on requirements, on how we observe the ocean, on the types of outputs that are needed to support policymakers. Sorry, if we could stay on that slide. And then finally, the delivery of services to end users on their impacts. Now, the Global Ocean Observing System has recently instigated under the UN Decade a new program called Ocean Observation Co-Design. Next slide. And Ocean Observation Co-Design has tackled, for example, basically focusing in on climate challenges that urgently need our attention in the ocean observing space. One of the first is improving our understanding of the carbon cycle in the ocean, but there are many others. And once you create an observing system that improves carbon data, for example, you can also increase the observation of many other critical things in the ocean, like heat, salt, and other scalars that we need to address other problems. For example, many aren't aware that cyclone forecasting critically depends on ocean heat. The top 10 meters of ocean heat are actually what drives cyclone intensity, the amount of water that is held by a cyclone, and therefore it's the length of time that a cyclone sticks around is totally dependent on surface ocean heat. We also, as was beautifully discussed by the last speaker, we need to sustain conservation of living marine resources. And that means putting out sensors that can measure eDNA, that can do underwater imaging, and also that can bring new data to shore. When we have storms, we need to have improved storm surge predictions. That's also data comes directly from the sea, and marine heat waves that have increased radically in the last decade, we need to monitor and predict those. And all of these, of course, are driven by key current systems that move heat, salt, and organisms around the ocean. So these are our ocean climate challenges, and these are the committees, the 6 committees of the Ocean Observation Co-Design Program under the UN Decade in the Global Ocean Observing System. So what do we need from the global community? What do we need from our policymakers? We need a massive lift. Right now, the ocean is so critically underobserved that, as I said, we can't even generate a nowcast of current conditions. We need to rethink how we observe the ocean. Next slide. The way we observe the ocean now is done individually by single countries putting observing systems often in their local environment. But if we zoom out to the big scale, we can think about how nations united to build the International Space Station. And this can give us an inspiration to think about how do we observe the ocean at a step change where nations come together internationally to co-invest in ocean infrastructure and ocean observation systems. So we must act at this same scale for ocean observation and support the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development by the best possible observing system. And this is something that can be done if nations step up and work together to support ocean observation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anya. This is also wonderful and so informative to really also understand the role of the ocean, global scale in terms of the ocean, carbon cycle. And as you said, and the need to really in coordinated infrastructure like ocean for the ocean. So that's what we need for really delivering the data and the observations that can really help us with the management and the protection of coastal communities. So we're now going to go from the global scale to the very local scale and really look at in specific areas of the world, and in particular, I think we will delve into the biosphere reserves, and UNESCO is managing a huge network, and Dr. Antonio Abro is going to tell us all about it. Over to you, Antonio.
Thank you very much, Julian. Thank you to the organizers for allowing us to give some information and perspective from the UNESCO Biosphere Reserves. In fact, I will start by informing that during the last meeting of the MAB, Man and the Biosphere International Coordination Council, there was a message from Monaco, endorsed by Portugal, encouraging a broader connection between UNESCO MAB Biosphere Reserves and the UN Decade for the Oceans. So this is part of the message that I start by delivering. Can we move into the next slide, please? And just a brief about what is the UNESCO Man and the Biosphere Program, and then of which the Biosphere Reserves are the central actors. So the MAP program is in fact a scientific program, intergovernmental program that aims to establish a scientific basis for enhancing the relations between people and the environment. This means that there is a knowledge and research basis that then will be explored and used for not only conserving or promoting biodiversity conservation, but also as socioeconomic development. The program is very well established since 2015. There is a strategy and an action plan with a vision, and the MAP Secretariat that is hosted by UNESCO Division of Ecological and Earth Sciences as a mandate. Can we move into the next slide, please? And then the biosphere reserves are acting as learning places for sustainable development. One of the best definitions that we can find for these sites is that they really are living laboratories for testing interdisciplinary approaches. So not only looking at one level of the environmental or social economic development, but mixing all kinds of vectors and disciplines in order to better understand and manage the complex world that we live, all the changes and interactions between social and ecological systems, including peace and management of biodiversity. And next slide, please. We are not talking about just protected areas or nice sites with outstanding biodiversity that are recognized for these assets, but we are talking about 276 million people that live inside the UNESCO Biosphere Reserves that are spread all over the world in 738 designated sites, including some transboundary biosphere reserves, which means cooperation, both bilaterally or multilaterally, including continental cooperation. And they are distributed all over the world. So this is the stage in our point of view that could fit and help and support most of the discussions that we held here today. Next slide, please. I will go now into 2 or 3 examples. And because biosphere reserves are sites where daily the communities, the researchers, the managers, the policymakers are working. So this is, I will tell a little bit of 2 or 3 situations, and it's good also to bring good stories, and because we need hope and we need to demonstrate that it is possible to do things. And this is the case of a Biosphere Reserve in Palawan Island in the Philippines, where in a particular island close to Palawan, Pangatalan, this is the aspect of the island in 2011. And next slide, please. And currently, this is the same island. Of course, there is here a lot of work on restoration, ecological restoration and recovery of habitats, terrestrial and coastal. But this island is mostly like a research vessel that is looking to the sea. So I am not showing the island as a success case for the terrestrial situation. Next slide, please, because it will be a minor example. So this is a small island that is managed by by Foundation. And as an example of recovery, it's good, but not enough because it's very small. So from this island and from this positive perspective, Sulbai Foundation, next slide, please, established a strategy for the ocean. And the idea is to recover the sea and restore the coral reef and the marine ecosystems as they did for land. So some research inland and inshore led to the development of processes and several initiatives for restoring coral reef. Next slide, please. And the monitoring after 5 years is showing a great development and capacity of the coastal and coral reef ecosystems to restore and recover at a quick and very fast speed. Next slide, please. So we are talking about live situations that we can monitor and follow visibly. So these are the structures after a few years. Next slide, please. That shows that biomass, maritime biomass is increasing and that opportunities for artisanal fisheries can be recovered. Next slide, please. So the idea here around the Pangatalan Islands, that is the central marine protected area that you see, this was a demonstrative success case that was immediately transferred into the neighborhoods. And so by engaging communities, by promoting what is called the sea academies, promoting ocean literacy and alternative livelihoods based on science approach, like capturing post-larvae that are used for aquaculture, inshore aquaculture, that fill 2 purposes. One, feeding the communities and providing income as well and reducing the pressure in the system, but at the same time allowing to grow key species for recovering the marine habitats. So this is one of the examples, to me, one nice story from a biosphere reserve that can be easily transposed and used to show all dimensions of our discussion today. And congratulations to Sulbai Foundation and especially to the leader, Fred Tardieu, that is in the middle of the photo. Next slide, please. Another example from a remote island is in Principe Island, the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, where a few stakeholders and community, or a small community that lives in the bay, shown below in the picture below on the left, is recovering one of the few mangrove remaining sites there in the island. So the idea is to bring information and to promote restoration at the same time by providing capacitation to local communities in order to use the mangrove for not only ecotourism-based information, but also for monitoring biodiversity. So a baseline was established, including a lot of citizen science, and techniques for restoring the mangroves were implemented, and this is targeting the restoration of the coastal ecosystems, as well as fighting and preventing erosion of the coastal areas. Again, a small project, a small initiative that ensured the participation of all local, national, and international stakeholders. And the next example, and the last, please, next slide, is about an ongoing initiative in Portugal. Portugal has 12 UNESCO Biosphere reserves, and they are being mapped on the ecosystems and ecosystem services and that exist in each of the UNESCO Biosphere reserves. In this case, we have 2 islands here. On your left side, Porto Santo Island in Madeira Archipelago, and the other island is Graciosa Island, sorry, Flores Island in the Azores Archipelago. So all the existing marine and coastal ecosystems were mapped and now are being assessed and evaluated on the ecosystem services by identifying key ecosystem services, and the identification of key ecosystem services. It's not only a technical or scientific issue, it's based on a participatory approach by including the local population on the analysis and the decision of which are the key ecosystem services. So in resume, next slide, please. I will say that UNESCO Biosphere reserves act as living laboratories for nature and human-centered solutions by definition, and they can be used for marine biodiversity, conservation, and sustainable development. They provide initiatives and they have a mandate on conservation and restoration. They need and they do promote research and development. They are suitable sites for monitoring whether biodiversity or climate change or any other sector, including socioeconomic dynamics. They tend to work together and cooperate through networks, regional networks, thematic networks, so easy to promote knowledge transfer. They ensure some training and capacitation in different levels, as well as they promote a lot of awareness and mobilization, especially with schools. They ensure local, national, and international governance, which is suitable for ensuring long or mid-term initiatives, and they are fully in line with the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, because the strategy that was approved in 2016 had that as a primary objective. In fact, what is missing here, it's communication and more availability of using the biosphere reserves as sites for sustainable development and benefiting from all the dynamics that exist. And I am mentioning here ECOSOC because the ECOSOC mandate is exactly in line with the biosphere reserves, but of course all other programs and agencies are strongly invited to explore and better link with UNESCO managed biosphere reserves. Thank you very much again for this opportunity, and I hope that we can continue dialoguing and exchanging views and perspectives for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antonio, and thank you also for bringing in the connection between SDG 14 and SDG 15, because also the whole work of a marine biosphere is contributing to both, through this kind of human-centered approach, research-driven management of ecosystem, and nice to hear some nice, some success stories and really how we can really concretely transfer all this global knowledge and apply it at the local scale. So colleagues, it's actually 3 o'clock here in Paris. I had hoped that we would have had more time for questions, but I think it would be a bit complicated to open the floor now, because I think we need to hand back the line. So I want to thank all our panelists this afternoon, this morning. I hope certainly, how we can really help with the implementation of SDG 14. Clearly, colleagues who are attending the high-level policy forum can draw from this information and highlight some of the priorities we've heard about in terms of where we need to invest in terms of generating this kind of new type of ocean research. And of course, the Ocean Decade for Ocean Science for Sustainable Development is quite a unique framework to collaborate and generate this transformative approach to science. We need better observations, and we have innovation in those areas in all fronts. And I think that's good, but we need to integrate this to really get this global picture and holistic vision of how the ocean is evolving in real time, but also in terms of future. And then we need to apply this knowledge to support management. That's really the ambition of all we are doing here, is to have the right capacities and the right knowledge where it's needed, so that we can have a vision for the ocean that we want. So with this, again, I want to thank all of you. I want to thank our two sponsoring UN missions, Kenya and Germany, for supporting this very important work. I want to thank my colleague at the UNESCO office in New York, Van Loo in particular, and here in Paris, Anastasia and Vinicius, for their support. And please do not hesitate to reach out. We will post the presentation on the Ocean Decade website. So if you don't have the link, it's oceandecade.org, and we'll have this posted in the next couple of days. So if you're interested, please don't hesitate to follow up. With this, I wish you a great day and good luck with the negotiation in Paris, in New York, I mean, and hopefully we can have an even stronger engagement of nations around the world in the implementation of SDG 14. So with this, thank you very much and see you soon.